Okay, hello everybody. Good morning, or maybe good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are today. If you're joining us from abroad, we do tend to have this webinar, particularly in the morning, because we do see people from abroad joining. So I want to say thank you so much for spending some time with us this morning to learn a little bit more about our International Baccalaureate program here at Western University. So some of the voices that you'll be hearing today, my name is Courtney. I am the IBEC program coordinator here at Western University. I may have spoken to some of you. I do recognize some names about the program here. If you do have questions about the program outside of this, you can email me at ibwestern@uwo.ca, and I'm happy to help answer any questions that you may have going forward. But our guest speakers, the reason you are all here, we have Dr. Glenn Odland and Ian Deakin joining us today. So Glenn is an active member of the IB Educator Network, presenting in all 3 regions of the IB globally. And Ian is the IBEC program founding member of Western University's IB program here, and he's the deputy head and dean of faculty at Dalton Academy in China. So thank you so much, Glenn and Ian, for spending time with us this morning. They both come with such a wealth of knowledge around IB and their experiences, so you'll really get to learn a lot more from their perspectives today as we go through and have our panel discussion and a Q&A. I'll go over quickly here the agenda so that you know, but we'll start off a little bit about talking about our program overview and our program structure. I will touch upon the application process as well, but then we'll really get into that panel discussion where you'll hear more from Glenn and Ian today, and we'll have that opportunity for a question and answer at the end as well. So if you have any burning questions that you'd like to ask either about the program or specifically to Glenn and Ian, feel free to do so. And Glenn, if you wouldn't mind, I will leave it for you here.
Great. Thanks, Courtney. And hello, everybody. Echo Courtney's welcome and thank you for joining us today. A few brief details about who I am and why I'm so enthusiastic about sharing with you about the IB program. I work with Courtney in the IB Educator Certificate Program at Western. I'm the academic program manager, so I tend to work with the instructors, making sure that they're up to speed and making sure that all the curriculum is aligned with the current practices in the IB. I personally have been involved with the IB since 1999, where I first attended their very first workshop in New York City, and drank the Kool-Aid at that point, as they often say, and have been increasingly and quite deeply involved with the IB in a number of ways since 1999. And I'll share a few more things about that as we get to the panel discussion, where Ian and I will talk to you about why this is such a valuable program in practice and in schools, and as you're considering or perhaps already engaged in education. One of the things I really like about IB, and I'll use this slide to just briefly touch on this, and the caveat will be, this is tip of the iceberg kind of treatment. It's a very well-developed and quite sophisticated program, and obviously that's what you're about to get involved in. There are 4 age-based programs, and they're represented by those 4 circles on the perimeter of the central ones, and we'll talk a bit more about those later. But what I think is so important about the IB program is the focus on the learner. And you can see from the core of this circle, everything spreads out from what's called the IB learner profile. But this is very symbolic. This is about student learning. And the entire program really focuses on how we can best understand teaching and learning. There are approaches to teaching and approaches to learning. You will learn all about that. And it's done from the perspective of wanting to equip students to be a positive influence in their world. And so it has very ambitious, quite noble goals, urgently needed in today's world. And so we really have a very deep kind of philosophical conviction about the merits of the program. And that's what the IB Educator Certificate will help you to understand more deeply. Next slide, Courtney. So there are 2 certificates that we offer. One of them is a certificate in teaching and learning, and the other is a certificate in leadership practice. We're going to dive into each of these a little bit more, but just so that you know, the IBEC certificate in teaching and learning is designed for both pre-service and practicing teachers. So you can be in an education program and you can engage in the completion of this certificate. Or you can be a practicing teacher who is looking to broaden and deepen your understanding of what an IB program is like, often with a view to being hired in an IB school. And that's the teaching and learning certificate. And then the leadership practice one is designed for aspiring leaders, or you can also be in a leadership position, but not in an IB school. You want to understand what the differences are about how you would be a more effective leader in the IB context. So there are those two options for the programs. One is focused on teaching and learning. The other is focused on leadership practice. Next slide. The program structure, as we've designed it, is meant to be very flexible and to be able to be offered across the entire globe. So it is entirely online, and it was actually designed that way pre-COVID. I know lots of programs have gone online, but we started, it was actually Ian, he'll maybe tell you a bit about this journey when he was a full-time employee with Western, but it was designed as an online program so that it could be offered to practitioners around the world. And we think that's one of the great strengths, is that it was, it's designed to be very interactive. It is time sensitive from the perspective that it's roughly 6 months in completion. You have 4 modules, each one 5 weeks in length, and then you have a break between them. So the actual time frame is about a 26-week time frame. But the benefit of this whole online programming is that you will be in cohorts of classmates sprinkled around the globe. And we think that's very IB and very beneficial in establishing a network of colleagues who you can tap into much throughout the course of your career. Next slide. So just to briefly give you some insight into the programs, these 2 programs are structured like this. They both have 4 modules. In each case, they're all 15 hours per module, and in each case, they take about 26 weeks to complete. The difference, of course, is in the focus of the content. So on the left-hand side, you see with the teaching and learning, you have an introduction to the IB, which has, you can be in any program, PYP, MYP, or DP, and it will be sort of sprinkled. In modules 2 and 3 of the teaching and learning, you go into a program specialization and a subject specialization when it comes to the MYP and DP. Our next slide will show you that a bit. So modules 2 and 3 are really about teaching and assessment, very focused on your program and your subject. And then in module 4, it broadens back out again to professional learning. All cohorts are involved in that one. And again, you can see with the leadership practice introduction in module 2, and then you look at instructional leadership, leading learning communities. And what's really beneficial about this is the professional learning focus of module 4 that has such long-term benefits for you in terms of connecting you to people who you can stay connected to and continue to engage with after the conclusion of the program. And next slide. So briefly then, in the teaching and learning, it's important to understand that what we're doing is honoring the need to focus in on a program level, and in the MYP or middle years program and diploma programs into a subject level as well. So these are the courses that we offer. The caveat that goes along with that is that for modules 2 and 3, it requires a minimum number of registrants or applicants. So in each cohort, each time we launch this, we have to review our applications, see how many we have, and then obviously we hope that each of the courses can be offered. There are times when if there's only 1 or 2 people in a specific subject, it just really isn't feasible and wouldn't be great learning for you. So we sometimes have to defer and hope to collect a few more applications for a subsequent launch or a subsequent cohort. But we believe that these is pretty broad range. If you're doing any research, you'll see that this is quite a wide range of offerings in the MIP and DP relative to what other universities will offer. Okay, next slide.
Okay, I'll talk a little bit about the admissions requirements for the program here. So if you're interested in applying to the Teaching and Learning Certificate, we are looking for a 4-year degree with a minimum B standing, or that's a 70% or equivalent of, depending on where you've taken your schooling. We're also looking for the completion of or the enrollment in a recognized teaching program. I do get a lot of questions surrounding what exactly this means. So here in Ontario, a recognized teaching program is called the Bachelor of Education degree. So that qualifies you to become a teacher here in Ontario or Canada. So depending on where you are around the world and which country you are, we just want to make sure that you have a program that does qualify you to be a teacher. And the reason being is that our program doesn't give you those certifications. Instead, it enhances your existing qualifications. Now, you don't have to have fully completed your teaching program wherever you are. We do accept those that are also enrolled. So we do have many first-year and second-year students that are currently enrolled in that program. So those are both required for for our teaching and learning certificate and our leadership practice certificate. But if you are applying to that leadership practice certificate, we do also require a minimum of 3 years teaching experience. So the hours for the program is about 60 instructional hours is what the entire program will work out to be. So that's about 15 hours per module. So as Glenn had mentioned, we do have 4 modules for this program, and you'll be taking one module at a time. Now, because of the subject specializations, when you get into module 2 and module 3, you do have to complete the entire program in its entirety. So you will have to start from module 1 to module 4. It will take about 26 weeks in total to complete, or 6 months. And what you can expect is about 10 to 12 hours per week devoted to this program for each of those modules. That will be different forum posts, discussions, assessments, assignments, readings. We do see about 10 to 12 hours per week is average what you'll dedicate to the program. Tuition is $3,500 Canadian for the entire program, all 4 modules. Now, upon successful completion of the program, there is an IB registration fee, and that's $265 US. Now, this fee is set by the IB and is not set by Western, but we will provide you with all of the links on how to register once you do complete the program. I just wanted to put it there as well, just so that you're aware. And our next intake starts September 27th. So it's coming soon. That's our September cohort. We do also currently offer a January cohort as well. If you are interested in the September cohort, applications are open, and they're open until September 3rd. So I believe that's 2 weeks tomorrow. So you do have some time to start and begin your application. It is not too intensive of an application process, so not to worry there, but I'm happy to help answer any questions that you may have. We also do have a step-by-step guide on our website as well on how to complete the application. But that's the link there if you do want to get into the application system, take a look and see what that's going to look like. But we will leave it now for the panel discussion. So this is really the meat and potatoes of the webinar. I have a couple of questions that I have created just from what I've seen throughout the years that we've done this program that I'll ask Glenn and Ian, but I will open up the floor as well to any questions that you do have after. But we'll get it started. We'll talk a little bit about why the IB. If you both wouldn't mind kind of jumping in here and discussing a little bit more about the IB itself.
Sure. Thanks, Courtney, for that. And yeah, as Courtney mentioned, this is really where we want to make sure that we've spent the bulk of the session this morning and give you an opportunity to interject with your questions too. As you would expect, and the way Ian and I will work this is that we're actually very good friends. We've worked together for many years, and we will bounce back and forth. So one person will lead, the other person will chime in with anything else that he has to add to it. And maybe just to further elaborate on my context, after being introduced to the IB, I implemented IB in a school in Alberta, worked there for a number of years before moving overseas to Singapore, and was the head of the school, of the Canadian International School. Interestingly, Ian Deakin was also the head of the International School prior to me, and Ian is the one who introduced IB at CIS, so I have a big debt of gratitude to Ian. As you would expect, with an International Baccalaureate educator certificate, it does have an international recognition. And that's kind of the starting point for this, is that it broadens your horizons, and it makes you about that in a bit more, but it helps you to understand what it means to be an internationally minded educator. And the caveat I would give to that is that it's not limited just to international positions. In Alberta, I was the president of the IB Alberta, the Alberta IB Educators. I can't remember the technical term for it. It was a collection of IB schools, both public and private, or independent as they're called. And so there were lots and lots of very fine educators and really great programs in Alberta. I know Ontario has an equally robust program as well. So it's partly to help you understand what it means to be internationally minded as you educate down the street. And I think that's crucially important as well. Ian, let me toss it over to you and let you add to it as well.
Thanks, Glenn. Thanks, Courtney. Hi, everyone. Thanks to you for joining us tonight. If you're practicing teachers, I know you're getting ready for the start of the next school year. So thanks for wedging us in there into your thinking tonight. By way of personal introduction, I started with the IB in 1984 when I took my first teaching job at a place called Ashbury College in Ottawa. As Glenn said, I went to Singapore. I actually went in '96, and I made a strategic decision with the owner of the school in Singapore to take the Canadian school down the IB path for a number of reasons. And then over my career, I've been mostly in IB schools, but I ended up following into a bit of a pattern where I did open new schools and register them, get program authorization with the IB. So after Singapore, I took GEMS American Academy, GEMS World Academy, GEMS International School, all through the IB accreditation program, 2 or 3 programs sequentially, one after the other. And then when I retired from K-12, I went back to London, Ontario, and was fortunate enough to join the Faculty of Education, and they were working on the IBEC authorization. So we had some really interesting conversations about where to take that program at Western and why we wanted to do that. And really early on, actually, I found out that Glenn had retired at about the same time, and he was hanging around just north of London. So the first phone call I made was to Glenn to say, would you like to come join me and work on this fantastic program? And I won't tell you why we wanted to do it. That will fall out from our panel discussion. But I'm happy to be with you tonight, and I'm looking forward to some of the questions that you're going to ask us.
Great, thanks, Ian. The idea of access to more teaching jobs, I think, follows from that first one, which is just you will be known to have gone through a very robust engagement with the IB training program. The IB Educator Certificate has some differences from the workshops. We'll talk a little bit more about that later in the Q&A session. But the reason you get access to more teaching jobs is simply you're very attractive to employers, and you will understand what it means to be an IB educator. I would argue that you'll be attractive even to schools that aren't IB, but simply want very keen lifelong learners who want to expand their horizons. And any principal or head of school or superintendent is going to be very keen to find candidates like that. So as you can see from the box, there are almost 400 IB schools in Canada and over 3,000 in the world. There will be a direct appeal to you, to the schools about you and your candidacy because of your completion of the IB Educator Certificate.
So Glenn, I'll jump in here. So really there's 2 dimensions to that conversation. To the blue ribbon schools, to the schools that are generally recognized as being really high quality internationally, a young teacher, a nascent teacher with limited experience is probably not going to get access to a teaching job in one of those schools, in the real tier 1 anyway. But a lot of the tier 2 schools are IB schools. And if you can present yourself at time of interview as already have recognized the power and the value in the IB, and that you've invested in yourself by taking this IBEC program, it will automatically make you more attractive even to a real solid tier 2 school. And more importantly, I'm sitting here talking to you from China tonight. There's an explosion of IB schools around the world, particularly in China at this moment. And a school head who's opening an IB school and looking for accreditation for the program, they're under great pressure to demonstrate to the IB that they're committed to the process of implementation. So the IB puts the squeeze on the head to make sure they're hiring a good number of people with IB experience or IB training. So again, if you come and you've invested already in yourself, from the budget point of view for the head, it's much easier to hire when you've already paid for the initial training. And then when you come into the school with the IBEC, you're helping him tick a box or her tick a box that they're recruiting people who understand the program and who are ready to start developing high quality IB aligned lessons day 1.
Well put. And again, speaking from direct experience, because you're in that role, so it's excellent to have you bringing that perspective. The third box there, that notion of being granted access to the IB network, there's a handful of dimensions to that. The starting point is that as part of a cohort, and this is a cohort approach to learning, so you go through your learning with the same group of colleagues, that develops a really strong network of leaders and teachers with whom you can stay connected. And so that's just kind of the starting point, is that you have a group of people that you've gone through this training program with, who will be sprinkled around the world, have different experiences, and will be extremely useful, beneficial, great kind of a professional group to, we often refer to them as professional learning networks. You have your own built-in professional learning network. When we first designed the teaching and learning program, there was a practicum component that meant to have you out in schools. The arrival of COVID has put that on hold. And so what we've done is we've modeled the teaching and learning, the end of that program, in much the same way that we did with the leadership practices, which is to create a professional learning network and to understand how that works best to get to launch you on that process, but then to unleash you to continue that process. And then the other thing is there's all kinds of resources that you will gain access to that are formally archived at the IB that you will have access to in what's called the Professional Resource Center. So you have a ton of great research-focused and best practice kind of standard of materials for you as a practitioner, whether it's as a teacher or a leader. Ian?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Glenn. So when we actually started the conversations about IBEC at Western, the language we used was ecosystem. So we were trying to bring people from around the world, school leaders, beginning teachers, practicing teachers, thought leaders into this one ecosystem that then would become self-generating in terms of the contacts that would be made and the opportunities it would present. So you've got heads opening new schools. They know we've got teachers at Western who are doing the IBEC. The first place they're going to look is to their own contact sheet from you guys in the program when they're hiring and filling spots. You on the teaching side, once you have your IBEC, the first people you call are the principals that you know were in the Western program as well. So that was really our thinking, was to actually, we were the facilitators of the networking that would result in opportunity. But I do want to go back to what Glenn said about the PLNs. So, you know, the model of professional development has long left behind the idea of putting people on planes and sending them to a workshop for a weekend, because the research is clear that has no impact on student learning, or very little impact on student learning. So the new model is around PLNs. So in my schools, I've always been, not always, sorry, I've been a believer in the professional learning community construct for a long, long time. And I'm really pleased to see that the IB has embraced it really fully now as well. So when you go into an IB school, you will be in a professional learning community, and it will be your responsibility to have membership in, to create your own personal learning network, where you are a member in multiple organizations that then you have access to these emerging ideas out in your own ether world that you then bring into your PLC and discuss, and that becomes the fuel for action research at the school. And that's the model we want to make schools dynamic and to drive the innovation in schools forward. So the PLN stuff is critically important, and the IB presents a really powerful, as Glenn said, both research and practical knowledge informed access for people within the IB world to draw into your PLN, and through that into your PLC in your school, so everybody benefits.
Yeah, great. And just a side note, Ian, when he was with Western, actually designed the coursework on this PLN, and it was amazing, the depth and the quality of the research that you conducted, Ian. It was very impressive. And so the content and the program as it's been designed is really your brainchild.
Well, thank you for that.
So, I mean, we kind of touched on the notion of competitive advantage. I don't know if you wanted to add anything else, Ian. And again, you are living this out. So it's there's nothing more legitimate than somebody who's actually walking down this path to say, this is important and this is what I look for.
Well, I'll tell you, I'll give you an example. I've got a young fella who was trained in Texas. He taught calculus in Texas for a while, and then in Boston. He's been with me in Beijing for a while. He's a pretty talented teacher, and now he wants to break out of the AP box. So I've introduced him to Courtney, and he's waiting for the IBDP, or I guess it is IBDP calculus IBEC, because he sees it as a gateway to opportunities that right now he doesn't have. And calculus teachers are in high demand, like physics teachers globally, but he still sees that having the IBEC is going to provide him with a different platform and different opportunity.
Yeah.
Ian, I do get this question quite often, if you don't mind if I jump in quickly. But a lot of students will say, I'm taking this particular teaching subject in my teaching degree, but I'm hoping to take a different subject in the IB program. How do schools look upon that if you're taking a subject that maybe doesn't quite align with their teaching subjects from their teaching degree?
Well, there has to be some competencies that are transferable across the arbitrary subject boundary, is what I would say. So, if it's within the science field, biology, chemistry, biochem, transferable, mathematics skills, transferable, humanities across language versus social sciences, some transferable skills and understandings. But if it's too far removed, then I wouldn't look at it favorably personally. Glenn, when you say
I would echo this. Yep, I would echo the same thing. There has to be the reasonable expectation that something about your training and experience equips you to, first of all, understand the content of the IB Educator certificate, because there will be assumptions about your understanding of that content. It's really about how you deliver it and how you assess it that we go into. So you're not learning about math and physics, you're learning about how to teach it. So you do have to have a level of competency there to complete the program successfully. And then certainly as an employer, and in particular, the standard for professional, competence in IB schools is very high. You won't learn on the job there. You need to come into it competent already, because it moves fast. Expectations are high from the part of everyone involved. I mean, from internally as administrators and as teachers, certainly from your students, from the parents, they're all going to have very high standards. So that's our threshold when we're placing people into classrooms is there a very strong, do we have a strong confidence level that the teacher will help the students to succeed? And that kind of is the baseline of whether or not it would be a good match for you to take some other program or subject as your IBEC focus.
And then we did have one other question come in, and that would be, how do Canadian IB schools see international IB experience?
It's great.
Well, let me just jump in with, it's not meant to be judgmental, but the good ones are all over it. And I would say, go to a place where there's an understanding of the value of a breadth of experience. And that can manifest itself in so many different ways. You may have had a career before you became an educator. I always viewed that as a wonderful experience to come into the classroom with experiences beyond just educators. Maybe you focused on education your entire life. That's fine. What have you done with that? What have you learned? How curious are you about the world? How respectful are you of the differences that exist in our world? And to what extent do you want that to be part of the context in which you're operating? So as a candidate, we can maybe touch on this a little bit later too when we talk about the interview process, but you really need to be measuring the kind of school that you're applying to as much as they're going to be measuring you as a candidate for that school. And make sure you're going to a school where you're going to be challenged and supported, and where the kind of work you do with students is going to be aligned with your goals, your philosophical goals as an educator.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Now I'll leave it at that. That was good.
Okay.
The other thing I would say is that, there's really two kinds of international educators. That those that go out for 2 years and go home for whatever reason, and then there are educators more like Glenn and I, who you go for 2 years and you stay for 30. So when you go out and you see and you feel and you be the transformational moment, when you be that international educator, that the fires are stoked by what you're going to learn in the IB. But then when you go into a school, particularly even a mid-tier IB school and above, and you get into those schools and you're cooking. I mean, you're in there with well-intending people, bright people, motivated people. Everyone's held to account by the framework and the system of the IB. So it's transparent and it's exciting and it's dynamic and it's enriching. And when you're in it, and it's hard to leave. I took a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old out of Canada, expecting to go to Singapore for 2 years. in 1996. I'm still overseas. It's just like, so it's such a beautiful way to do what we do and to have an impact. And the more countries you travel to and the more other, meaning people not like yourself, that you interact with, and the more cultures that you interact with. I mean, we live the mantra, we embody and then exude the values. And it's an amazing way to live your life, and there's no richer place to practice your craft.
Hear, hear.
Okay, so we will move on. I did develop a couple of questions, if you wouldn't mind answering on the next slides, each of you just from your own perspectives. And this is more about maybe the hiring process for you and your perspective, and maybe some tips and tricks, and then we will open it up to the floor as well. But I guess question number one, how can I increase my chances of being hired?
Sure. Why don't I let you lead off on these questions, and I'll jump in, or we can bounce back and forth. Ian, start with the first one.
Well, as Glenn said already, is, you know, we're paid to be high impact. So we're looking to hire people that make an impact day one. And that involves everything. That involves, you know, who you are as a human being and what you've been exposed to or involved in throughout your youth and your early career, or just it's the whole package. As well as, you know, the depth of your knowledge. We can help you develop pedagogy, but you've got to come to us fully loaded on knowledge and understanding. You can't learn that in the workplace. So you're presenting a portfolio. And if you're applying to an IB school, obviously one of the key elements is, what do you know about the IB? Are you going to be able to fit into the culture of my community? Do you understand what it means to be an impactful IB teacher or IB leader? That's what we're looking for. We're looking for somebody who knows what the deliverable is, who understands the goals of an IB school, the values of an IB community, has the personal integrity and the dispositions and attributes to get into a classroom and build relationships with kids and with parents and with colleagues to deliver the IB outcomes. That's what we're after.
Yeah, so I totally agree with all of what you said, Ian, and just to kind of build on that, in terms of increasing your chances of being hired, and some of the other questions are going to help to contribute towards that answer as well. But there's a combination of qualifications, experiences, including life experiences, and make sure that you understand that your life experiences matter, especially in an IB or an international school. What you've done with your time when you have free time, it helps to contribute towards answering the third question is who you are as a person. What's your character? What do you believe deeply? What gets you up in the morning, and not in the kind of rehearsed way that we'll often do in preparing for, you know, we'll prepare statements of philosophy and we trot them out, and we, you know, we'll spout what we think an interviewer is looking for. I was never interested in canned answers and rehearsed answers in an interview process. I really wanted to understand what made this person tick. And that's what I was really trying to tap into when I was interviewing candidates about being hired. But just to come back to or finish my thought on this one, you're doing one of the really important things, which is you're showing a commitment towards investing in yourself, in your qualifications. And that's a starting point. Without those, you're just not even going to get looked at by the really good schools. So congratulations. I hope that that you do complete this IBEC certificate, because that's one really good indicator of your commitment to doing what's required to be really the best you can be.
What types of candidates stood out to you in the interview process?
Well, I'll take it a little different direction, because we want to be honest. So the other thing that I'm a deep, deep believer in is a classroom coaching model. So, and I'm driving this initiative now in the two schools we have with Peking University. So for me, it's all about a teacher who understands that when you have that shared time with your students in front of you in the classroom, it's a performance time. It's no different than being a football coach and having your players on the field, or being a symphony orchestra conductor and all the players are there, all the musicians are there in the room, or if you're directing a play, all the actors are on the stage. So I'm looking for people who understand it's about our job as a teacher is to be able to encourage and facilitate the shared performance of the students when you're in that time together. So I'm a huge believer in flipped classroom practices. So I'm really looking for people who have played team sport or who have been in some sort of a collaborative process where they're working with others, so that it's not just one person's performance, but it's about the collective performance and how each person takes responsibility for the learning for other people. So for me personally, that ultimately, that's what I was looking for. Like beyond what we've spoke about in question number one about showing prior commitment to the IB and investing and knowing the values and knowing the deliverables, then for me, it was somebody who understood the role of teacher as facilitator of performance and planning lessons that allowed for maximum student performance time, making thinking visible. And then the teacher's role is to engage in that learning conversation and continuous assessment.
Ditto, and just add a little different flavor to it. The preamble to it is that the schools that we're talking about will demand more of you than some schools do. And my last three schools, for different reasons in each case, really expected people to be prepared to give of themselves enormously generously. But as is always the case, that which you invest in heavily always has enormous returns too. So there were incredible benefits that came out of it and huge satisfaction and the kind of connections to people, your students, their parents, your colleagues, that just wasn't possible without doing this. So when I was interviewing candidates, I was always looking for people who understood this and who in some way had chosen to engage that. So Ian's analogy of being involved in some athletic endeavor or symphony or the arts or some way where you're throwing yourself into a project or a process and you know that it's only going to work if you just give 100% of yourself. I always love people who'd had camp counseling experiences, because if they'd been involved in a camp, you knew that they knew what that meant, to live and breathe that experience. And so the essence of it was, is this a person who understands the importance of the work they'll be doing and is prepared to give of themselves, knowing that there will be some benefits for it? And of course, that's the kind of thing you can't manufacture. It's not about a rehearsed answer. It's about, who are you? What have you chosen to do with your life? And how will that fit with what we're going to need in this school setting?
Courtney, do you need shorter answers from us? Are we going to run out of time? No?
I'm not even certain what time it is. It's okay though. You're giving so much information. I hope everybody else is okay with it, but we'll keep going. If we don't have as much time for questions, we'll make sure that we get them to send them to us an email to answer, but let's keep going how we're going, because this is perfect.
Okay. So in 1996, when I decided to take the Canadian International School in Singapore down the IB route, I had to get on bent knee and beg to get into a leadership workshop, because at that time they were all closed unless you were already in an IB school. So it was a really catch-22 or a conundrum, that how do you get into a closed shop? I want to open an IB school, but I can't even get the leadership category 1 workshop because I'm not in an IB school. It was really tightly closed, and only people who were already working in the schools could take the workshops. Well, that changed over time. So now my understanding, and Glenn will know this better than I, and if I'm wrong, it's okay, correct me, but my understanding is the workshops are now open to people who are not IB practitioners. So a lot of time is spent on the mission, vision, values stuff of the IB, and they're not getting to the nuts and bolts now, certainly until a category 2 or a category 3 workshop. When we designed the IBEC, Glenn and I, with the histories we have, we went out to people that we have known, and we know they are involved in curriculum building, examination review, they're on site visit teams. They are all leaders in their schools in the IB, either PYP, MYP, or DP. So we went out and handpicked, I don't know, was it 14 or 20 people we'd worked with, the best people we'd ever worked with, to build these programs and then be the instructors in these programs. Now, I'm sure since I left, there's been some turnover, but I'm sure that you guys have been able to replace them with equally or even perhaps even better, although I didn't think there was anybody better, but I was a bit biased. So we built the IBEC for people who know, who are doing it, who've been living it for decades in their schools, in leadership positions. They built the program and they're delivering the program. I put my hand on my heart and I would tell you, and this is not a sales pitch, I put my hand on my heart and I will tell you there's no better learning opportunity and there's no better value for money than what we put together here at Western.
to build on that, yes, you are right. And yes, we have had a little bit of turnover, but more than that, just growth. Sometimes we have multiple cohorts and we have to have more people, and we have attracted through the connections that the recruits had. And, this is what happens, is that good people attract more good people. And really, one of the key things that I would want to point out, or to build on what Ian is saying, why that matters is because you're engaged with these instructors in a much different way in the IB Educator Certificate than you are in a workshop. And here's the difference. The workshop model has its merits, and when you need a quick and dirty, lots of heads of school will still need to rely on that because they have to get something done over the course of a weekend. But as an educator, you know that there's a vast difference in trying to cover content in 3 sessions, Friday afternoon through to Sunday afternoon, a maximum of about 18 hours of instruction. That's the old drinking from a fire hose model. In that case, you don't have the luxury of deep engagement with your instructor. It is face-to-face, and there are some merits to that. So there's the ancillary kinds of learning you get from that, but it is so one-directional, and it is so content-oriented that you don't have time to absorb, to think about, reflect on, which is in the essence of the IB program, and then to ask deeper questions. So that the extended engagement with the curriculum being led by such fine educators makes for this combination of depth in your understanding that is just impossible in an IB workshop. And the workshop model has 3 categories. A category 1 is introduction. That's people who don't know anything at all about it. Categories 2 and 3 go into greater depth. The IBEC, a question we often get is, how does this relate? Well, it's well beyond what a category 1 would be, and it is category 2 and 3 in its depth and focus. It's more like a 2 in the breadth. It's more like a 3 in its depth, because you're engaged for 4 modules of 5 weeks each. It's a much longer way of processing, understanding, submitting coursework, having feedback on that. It is a model that lives out what the IB is expecting you to do. That's one of the profound ironies I always felt. And I'm a member of the IB Educator Network, so I've delivered tons of these workshops. And yes, I do believe they have some value, but I've always squirmed and felt uncomfortable that I was going into a workshop where I was telling people this is how learning best happens, but I'm not actually going to do it that way because we've only got a weekend. So here you go, read this, look at this, take this off and do it on your own, or any number of things that were really not honoring the principles of good learning. Our IBEC program honors the principles of good learning much more effectively.
I'll go back to the network pieces. So we've now got 20, 25 people who are leading programs in really good schools around the world who are all invested in the Western IBEC, and they're all in positions to either be the decision maker on a hire or a decision influencer on a hire. So again, the network and the impact and the possibilities of being a member of the IBEC at Western. When Western received the authorization, it was only one of 3 universities anywhere in the world that was authorized for both teaching and learning and leadership practice. So this is a big program. So we've got good people in powerful positions globally who, when they see your application to the school where it says Western University IBEC, that will be read in the best possible light. What advice can I give somebody interested? Do it.
Yeah, I'm echoing what Ian was talking about. I think this is one of the best kept secrets in our profession. The incredible opportunities that are embedded here, and of course the stars have to align. It has to work for you. If you have a family, you need to make sure that it's going to work for your family. You've got to take care of the details, and there are lots of them, and there are sacrifices that you will make. There's no question. But as with anything, there are trade-offs and there are incredible benefits that you get when you've done that. I think the process of applying to an international school is to remain open-minded in your search. And often I would interview people who was very clear they just had they had either one school or one country or one city or one characteristic that they wanted to get in their search for a school. And I've always felt that well, I always appreciate somebody who has a clear focus, and that's helpful. If you are so narrow in your the options that you'll consider, you may well miss out on something that you had no idea what an amazing opportunity it's going to be. And so be open-minded in exploring. And of course, when it comes to decision time, make sure it works for you. But in the exploratory stage, consider any good school anywhere in the world as an investigation anyway. Explore it, find out, discover, talk to people who've been there, do your homework so that you make an informed decision, but be open to it looking quite different than you thought it might look.
Perfect.
So Ian, you did discuss upon this a little bit with the PLN, but if you wouldn't mind just quickly touching upon maybe the differences between the IBEC versus the IB workshops. We do get that quite often. I will also add, we do have someone who's curious to know if you do know how to become an IB workshop leader as well, if they wanted to lead these particular programs.
That's your world, Glenn.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we've talked a bit about the difference between the IBEC and the IB workshop and the depth that goes into. I would say the IBEC, think of it as a program that has much greater depth and will lead you to learn about something in the way that you should be teaching it. So there's a philosophical alignment of how the program is delivered and how you're expected to either teach or lead. So it has a very, very consistent kind of delivery, but it equips you at a much, much deeper level than an IB workshop would do. And it's simply a function of the structure and the amount of time that you spend on it and how you will be led through the content.
Well, Glenn, sorry to cut you off, but also it's almost multidisciplinary, right? Because you would have a category 2 workshop on lesson design, and then you'd have another on assessment, wouldn't you? So,
Yeah,
I mean, what I would say is that the module in teaching and learning, module 2 and module 3 certainly are at least category 2 workshops, separate workshops.
Yeah.
Category or module 1 is like a Cat 1 workshop primarily, but 2 and 3 are like category 2 plus, and maybe you might say that the module 4 is a 3.
Yeah, I think that analogy works well, and certainly you're getting both breadth and multidisciplinarity to it from the fact that you're addressing a much broader range of what it means to be an educator or a leader in the case of the leadership practices one. And that there was one question about how you can become a workshop leader. So it is by application to the IB, and what they're going to ask for is there's always letters of reference. You have to have the permission of your head of school or principal, because when you become a member, there's release time that they have to approve for you to be able to go out and lead these workshops. You will not be considered for workshop leadership until you have lived out the delivery of what it is you want to be a workshop leader for. So I would say if you're interested in becoming a workshop leader, the assumption there is that you've been involved in IB for a number of years in teaching and learning as an educator, or in leadership in some role if you want to be a member of the IB Educator Network in the leadership practices. So possible, yes, but that's kind of down the road. That you need to have been involved with IB for some years before they would take you on as a workshop leader. And then there's leadership training that they would offer once you've been approved. But the assumption is a level of engagement first.
I want to go back to deeper learning. And I'm going to use teaching and learning as the example again. But the way we designed the IBEC at Western was that we flowed from lesson design, lesson delivery into assessment, so that you can reflect on the IB values and the IB expectations and practices as you are through the lens of designing and delivering your lessons, and then looking for learning, looking for evidence of learning and feedback to students, and differentiation or personalization to extend the most able to consolidate in the middle and to support those who are struggling. So by taking these modules on one after the other, the way they're sequenced, you actually get to a deeper level of understanding about how it all fits. How does this, what we do is the technology of a classroom teacher, but how does that fit through the lens of the IB expectations and the IB values and the IB practices? And I think it results in much deeper learning and deeper understanding than it would be to go to 2 separate Cat 2 workshops.
Yeah. And thank you, Ian. I think that's very true. Triggered another thought for me. I've long said that the IB doesn't have a monopoly on best practice. It's not like only IB schools are good schools. There are good schools all over the place, and some IB and some aren't. The benefit of the IB is how coherent it is. and how integrated it is, and how there's an understanding of young learners as they mature through the PYP into the MYP, and what needs to change, and how you build on that practice of inquiry-based learning and concept-based learning, and how it culminates in a diploma program. You'll be equipped with a common vocabulary, which is one of the really important things in the world of education. We'll develop this edu-speak, and if you're not speaking the same edu-speak, it's sometimes hard to understand what that means. And lastly, it expects that you will engage your parents in the process too. Parents are crucially important in the education world, and we don't often give them enough of a role. And in an IB school, you should. So it helps you because you'll need to equip them with an understanding of what this means. And so it really engages another crucial partner in the child learning process.
What advice can you give to someone interested in applying to an international school? And I know you've probably sprinkled some stuff in here already, but if you did have extra advice to give.
Yeah, I don't think I've got anything more to add into that, other than maybe the last bullet will help to inform some of that too, because it really is about making a plan. I think we've lauded the benefits of doing so. It's how do you do so, I think is an important bit now. And so I think the notion of a recruitment agency is a really crucial one. Ian, do you want to comment on that?
Well, it's a more specialized world now. Search associates used to have a monopoly pretty well. And then after search, it was ISS, right? And then, some come and go, but the UWCs don't go to recruitment fairs anymore. And
Sure.
Singapore American doesn't go to recruitment fairs anymore. So the tier 1 schools now are inundated daily with thousands of applications. They just roll into their HR departments. So, it's a bit of a roll of the dice. You send your CV into a school like that. But you know what? Like, roll the dice, send it in. So you've got to, I would say there's multiple channels to get your paperwork in front of the decision influencer or the decision maker. So use every channel possible.
Yeah, and I think building on that, the answer to that, should I join a recruitment agency, is yes.
Yes.
In fact, Courtney, you can maybe give a few more of these details, but as part of your completion of the IBEC program, you will have either access to or be enrolled in one called Searchality, which is one of the ones that Ian and I are familiar with, and will give you a start to this process. And building on what Ian has said, the benefit of joining a recruitment agency, if this is a starting point for you, is that you will be exposed to, and you will develop an understanding of what the opportunities look like. How many schools are there? Where are they? What kind of programs do they offer? What would they be looking for? Because as you to join a recruitment agency, you'll need to fill out some of their information. That will help to deepen your understanding of what schools are looking for, so that you'll be better able to shape an application process, whether it's what you focus on in your CV or how you structure your cover letter, if you want to go directly to a school that you're really interested in. And both of those are appropriate, but you have to start somewhere, and you really need to be prepared to conduct some research on what the school you're applying to offers by way of programming, how you're going to be able to position yourself as a really strong candidate for that. And sometimes it's through a recruitment agency, and sometimes it's directly to the school itself.
And Glenn, just as you said, we do have a partnership with Searchality, so they do provide our IBEC students with a discount off of their membership for that agency. So we can talk a little bit more about that as well, maybe a little bit later. But I did want to open the floor up now to maybe some questions that the audience might have. I did see one come in that we can start it off with is, what advice would you give to a year 1 teacher candidate who's beginning the IBEC alongside the B.Ed? How can I succeed in the modules, even with the lack of experience in a classroom setting?
Yeah, you know what? That's a really good question. So if we reframe the question, it's, should I be doing this now or should I be waiting? I would say do it now, if you can manage the time, because you're going to learn your content from your B.Ed program. Well, first of all, no one learns how to be a teacher in a B.Ed program, right? You learn to be a teacher through your 13 years of exposure to the ideas of the teachers that you interact with from kindergarten to grade 12 or 13, wherever you are. So that's your toolkit. You develop that over a long time. And then when you go to teachers college, you maybe drop off some ideas, you attract some new ideas, you polish, that kind of stuff. So it's a misnomer to think you learn to be a teacher at teachers college. So why not then have two different pools to draw from? The philosophy and the values and the practices that are championed by your faculty of education, as well as what you're going to hear from an IBEC program with the people in your cohort there who probably are practicing teachers for the most part. So you're gonna be able to hear multiple perspectives while you're trying to figure out in your own head how it works for you, if you can handle it.
Yeah, and certainly there's a workload question that you just need to make sure that you're prepared for, and you kind of pace yourself and spread it out a little bit where you can. There will be a bit of overlap at times between what you're covering in the IBEC and what you may be covering in a methods course or in some of your pedagogically focused BEd courses. But look for alignments and look for ways to apply what you're learning in your BEd program in an IB context. And I think that that's going to be the benefit for it. But to Ian's point, I'll quote one of my favorite Chinese proverbs. The best time to plant a tree is 10 years ago. The second best time is today. And I'm a big believer in do it now. If you think this is something that you're going to want or is important, do it now, because sometimes deferring leads to delays that mean it's completely derailed. And so I would say, of course, there's some challenges that will be embedded in it, but if this is something you're serious about, you can make it work as a first-year BEd program, a second-year BEd program, or a practicing teacher of 10 years. There are differences in how you will approach it and how you need to manage your challenges, and there'll be benefits that each of you bring to that cohort, but engage with your classmates in a way that will bring your benefit, and then you'll benefit from what other people have and the differences in their approach to the course content.
Yeah, if I can answer the question in a completely different way, and I don't know where the audience is from, but I'll say this. When we first started the conversation with IBEC at Western, the intention was to embed it in the BEd program at Western, so that when our BEd grads were going out to the world, they were going out not only with their BEd, but also with the IBEC in teaching and learning. Because over my career, I firmly believe the Ontario trained, which is the one I know, but I'll say Canadian trained. But what I really mean by that is Ontario, because that's what I'm familiar with. The Ontario trained teacher stands up really well internationally as a nascent teacher, as a beginning teacher, real solid experiences through their own public education, and really touched up nicely at the faculty of education. So we felt that the BEd student with the IBEC going out looking for their first job, they would be able to jump the bottom 2 or 3 rungs of the employment ladder and get themselves into a fairly decent school, fairly established school right off the bat. So from the outset, we believed it not only was it doable, but it was a good thing to do for BEd students to do them concurrently.
I was just going to say, for additional resources, we actually did interview a BEd candidate over the winter during our IB speaker series who actually took the program concurrently, so both the IBEC and the BEd. So he actually gave his thoughts on how those two programs overlapped and how he was able to manage that workload. So that can actually be found on our website on our IB resource page. So if you want access to that link, feel free to email me. I'll put my email in the chat here, and I can give you a link to that as well. It might just help, in learning what somebody else thought of the program while completing it concurrently.
He must have said good things.
He did, actually. He recommended it to his mom, who was a principal at a Catholic district school board. So she actually completed the program and then retired. So.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Great.
Do we have any final questions from anybody? I'll stop sharing here. There's a lot of information that we gave in this webinar, and actually, wow, we were spot on 10:30 an hour. So we'll keep it open for a couple more minutes with any last minute questions that you may have. I'm looking to be hired locally with 10 years of PYP experience overseas. Will the IBEC add merit to that?
No. If you haven't learned it to be a great teacher with 10 years experience overseas, then IBEC's not going to matter. I mean, maybe some theory, but honestly, I mean, no, go rock the interview.
Yeah. Or consider the leadership practices one, not because you necessarily want to be ahead of school, but because, I mean, I always loved working with people who understood the challenges of my job, because clearly they're going to be, very community oriented, committed. So an option is to take the leadership practices one if you feel like you want to show a commitment to continued learning.
I'm embarrassed by my answer now. That was so much better.
You're right, though, Ian. I agree that as an educator, if you've been in a PYP school for 10 years, the IBEC certificate doesn't really layer anything on top of it.
I suppose the only argument you'd make is if you were in not a very good school. And then you'd be able to create the argument in the interview that, look, I was in this school, I couldn't break through to the next tier. I knew I needed to have something that was more formalized, a micro credential. So I went back to get the micro credential to get out of where I was stuck, to get another opportunity. So you could spin that into a narrative that would make you a more interesting candidate to interview, possibly.
Yeah.
Possibly. But in terms of the real learning, hopefully not that you were in a school for 10 years and you didn't become really excellent. That would be a shame.
Okay, I think that's it for all of the questions. So again, thank you to everybody who joined us today, but a special thanks to both Glenn and Ian for joining us. Ian from China, it's probably quite late for you there. You both provided so much insight and knowledge, and I hope that's really helped everybody today. So thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your day, whether that be morning, evening. But
My
take
pleasure. I hope someone takes something of value away from it. That's why we're in the business, because we just want to help people make good choices.
Agreed.
Thank you, Courtney. Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you, Courtney, and thank you to everybody. It's been very, very fun again. Thanks.
Great.